International travel is very limited this year because of, we all know, COVID. But it's not impossible. My husband, whose work is about traveling, requires him to do international travels all the time, had been stuck here in Korea for the past months. Absolutely no travel for him because the company prohibited it. But it's not going to be the case for the last month of this year because he needs to travel. But as a foreigner, you need to get a re-entry permit. So even though he is a permanent resident here in Korea, he still needs to get that magic re-entry permit. I asked him to share with me and with you the process. But before that, don't forget to click the subscribe button and click the notification bell so that you will be updated whenever I upload new videos.
Hello, this is Wendy.
So tonight, thanks to my husband, Manny, he is going to share with us how he applied for re-entry permit and how does it look like. Okay, so why do you need to get the re-entry permit?
All right. Well, actually, I haven't been traveling.
Yeah.
In fact, this will be my first
Travel.
business travel for year 2020, and it's very different from the past years. So there's a new requirement, which is before we could travel outside, and this is basically applicable for all foreigners, regardless of your visa, except for those who holds a diplomat visa or those with F4.
Kyopo.
Other than that, every foreigner has to get a re-entry permit before traveling. And of course, the consequence, which is actually very harsh, is that if you depart without a re-entry permit, then you will be at the risk of having your alien registration revoked. And that's obviously something that not good. So when we decided to have to do the business trip, aside from the additional requirements of getting a visa to our intended country when before were not required, aside from the requirements of getting a COVID test before getting a visa and before departure, we also need, I in particular as a foreigner here in Korea, also need to get a re-entry permit. And when I started at least looking into the requirements, I myself got a little bit confused. So I want to share exactly how I did it, and maybe it could give clarity to others that would eventually apply for that. So a couple of things that I found out when I applied for my re-entry permit. Number one is that right now it's completely done online. So you can't really go to the immigration office to apply. So everything, I think starting October this year, everything is done online because they also want to prevent the influx of people at the immigration office.
But how come others, I've read, that they were able to get re-entry permit in the airport?
Well, they did say that in exceptional or emergency cases, you could apply at the airport or even at the immigration face-to-face. But obviously, that's something that I would not suggest that you would take the risk because there's a risk.
Requirements, right?
Well, there's a risk of not being given the re-entry permit. So if you're just going there, all booked, the flight is booked, everything is just ready to go, and you think that you could get the re-entry permit at the airport, there's always this risk of you not having the required documentation, or for whatever reason you will not get it.
So let's clarify. You are getting a re-entry permit for business purposes.
Well, I'm leaving for business.
Yeah.
Okay, so and that's probably one area that needs to be clarified. When you apply for re-entry permit, first you have to do this at High Korea. So You go to your account in High Korea, you apply for Reentry Permit, and there's a button there for Reentry Permit. When you get into that,
We'll show that on the screen.
yeah, when you go to that page for Reentry Permit, you have two options. The first is what they call a general application, and the other one is for business application, right? So there are three categories, if I remember it right. There's for business, for journalism, and I think for education as well. Now, and this is where I think I need to clarify this, because there are different sets of requirements for your application type. So for general type, you basically just need to submit essentially two documents. First is the application form, and second is a consent form saying that you consent to get medical examination prior to coming back to Korea.
Let's put that on the screen, the consent form.
Sure. We will show it. And that's just that. Very straightforward.
That's for general.
That's for general.
So general could be going out for family vacations.
Right. And the general could be basically anything. Now there's another one for business, and for business you have to submit more documents like travel order, your employment certificate, your business purpose, your company certificate. Yeah, I think those are if I did not mention employee certificate or ID, you also need to submit that. So there are more requirements for business. Now, because I'm going for business, I initially applied for business. However, that's actually not that turned out to be a mistake, right?
Right.
The
But
reason
you're going there for business.
I'm going there for business, but it turned out like the business category is essentially to get an exemption from getting the medical examination prior to coming back. So the exact rule is that because business trips tend to be shorter, so this one, if you are going on business trip and you're coming back before 3 weeks, then you go to that business classification or business application, and that application is both for re-entry permit and an exemption from medical examination. I intend to stay longer than 3 weeks, and thus my application should have been general application, which eventually I had to update that. The immigration office told me to change my application type. So
instead of applying for business, you apply for general purpose.
for general purpose, because I'm not gonna get the medical exemption anyway because of the duration of my trip, and going to the general application means that I really don't need to submit more documents. We will post to you the cost of the application there. I think it's 24,800.
But what if you go back here before the 3 weeks period?
Well,
You still need to have the medical certificate.
then
because
I
you-
still need to get the medical certificate 48 hours as a general rule before my departure back to Korea. So there, I mean, so when I was researching about this process, I actually didn't know that there's not a lot of guidance on how you would apply. At the same time, I am very, very curious on how does the re-entry permit really look like. I wasn't sure if it's something that will be,
stamped or
put in my
sticker,
passport, or if it's a printout. I wasn't even also sure how does it look like, etc. So
Because as a backgrounder, before we used to have a re-entry permit during our early years
12
here.
years, 13 years ago.
Yeah, so the re-entry permit is a sticker. They put it in your passport. So, but currently, and then we didn't need to do re-entry permit anymore. So we totally forgot about that
Right.
until this year.
So what I'd like to
let's
do,
show them.
what I'd like to do is to show to you how a re-entry permit looks like.
On the screen.
Once your re-entry permit is approved, then they will have a copy of that in your Hi Korea account. The only thing that you need to do is to print it out, because essentially the requirement is that you should carry it, every time, especially exiting and coming back to Korea. And then the validity period turned out is 1 year. So it's a regular 1 year validity, which means that
Only one use.
single
Use.
entry for 1 year, which means that you really have to re-enter prior to the expiration of 1 year, because you cannot apply for another re-entry permit when you're already outside Korea. So the only time you could apply for a re-entry permit is before your departure from Korea. So again, we're gonna show that to you, how an actual re-entry permit looks like. So there, that's essentially my experience. Again, we'll
share it on the
we'll
screen.
share maybe the documents required,
Yes.
and then
How the re-entry permit looks like. And for clarification, all these, the approval, the re-entry permit, and then the consent is uploaded in your Hi Korea account. So you need to have the Hi Korea account, because that's where you apply, right? Online application for immigration purposes. And print it out, so there's no face-to-face transactions anymore, and then show it to the airport.
and by the way, the requirement is that if you're applying online, is that you have to apply at least
yes.
5 days before your departure. That's 5 working days before your departure, and that's so you cannot apply. The system would not allow you to apply if it's less than 5 days prior to departure.
So maybe that's where we read. I've read a lot about some expats going out and they got their re-entry permit at the airport. I don't know what's the process there. We don't know the requirements that they need to bring with them. But, if you just want to be sure about it, and anyway, you're sure about your travel, so why not process it 5 days prior so you can be qualified to do it online?
Yeah. Well, especially for a general application, there's really nothing much that they're asking except for the consent form that you have to sign. They're not asking for your itinerary, they're not asking for your flight ticket or hotel reservation. So I would not suggest to risk, applying, beyond the 5-day limit. In fact, you could apply even before that. All right, so I guess that's about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you want to know more, if you want to be updated about life in Korea, living in Korea, and all other things about living in Seoul, don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell. See you next time. Thank you, husband.